have a secret. I used to struggle with dull, saggy skin. Then I found Spoiled Child's E27 liquid collagen. This extra strength liquid formula packed with type 1 and type 3 collagen, vitamin C, and hyaluronic acid makes it so easy to visibly transform your skin and hair. No more chunky collagen powders, just a smooth, delicious liquid that can be blended with any drink. With over 100,000 five-star reviews, this liquid collagen is going viral for a reason. And with their try before you buy offer, you could try your full-size product at home before buying. Take the quiz at spoiledchild.com/quiz. That's spoiledchild.com/quiz.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Perfect ratio. That's what it is.
Oh, yes, of course. The perfect ratio.
Phi. I remembered the Greek letter before I remembered the English name for it. Although I feel like I learned about that from the Da Vinci Code, so I don't know.
I learned about it from the movie Pi. It's a very different connotation. It's really intense in that movie.
I probably learned about it from Tumblr.
Welcome to Monster Donut, a literary and historical deep dive into the Percy Jackson series and all of its following spin-offs. I'm Emily, a classic scholar-ish.
And I'm Phoebe, a dramaturg and story consultant. And today we're continuing our discussion of the Lightning Thief musical with the composer and lyricist behind it all, Rob Rokicki. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. We love all of the work you did. I mean, it's so clear how much you really dove into the material and how much you love it just as much as we do. And we're so excited to get to talk specifically about your piece of creating it and also your piece of analyzing these stories, because you came at it from a slightly different angle, because both of us are writers. So we don't really dive that much into the music side of things. But
it's such a brilliant, gorgeous interpretation of these books and has revealed so much about them to us. Like, I feel like half the times I came back to the theater to see it again, because I saw it so many times, and we'll probably see it many more times. I feel like half the times I did it, it was like to hear you blow my mind with Tree on the Hill again, or like My Grand Plan.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. I'm so glad. That's all we ever really wanted to set out to do, was like honor the story as best we could. And Joe and I are fans, so we wanted to make something for us that we would love as fans of it.
I think your use of the theatrical medium, especially to tell the story, is so unique, and I love it to death, because Percy Jackson has now existed in many different mediums, and every one of them I think has its benefits for telling this story, but I do think theater is one that works particularly well for him. So I do want to start us off by asking, as someone who has spent all of this time rebuilding the Percy Jackson story for theater so that it fits into the theater, what is it, in your opinion, that makes Percy Jackson a good theater show? Like, specifically, what makes Percy Jackson theater?
I think, just like in reading a book, you use your imagination. There's so much world building, and theater is an immersive place. It's also a communal place, which I think is really cool. I mean, there's an immediacy and a vitality. It's very visual. You get to watch, these actors breathing life into these characters that you love. It's kind of like when you listen to music by your favorite artist and then you go see them live in like a rock venue. It's like, oh, this is just hits in a different way, I think theater is just the perfect, especially musical theater, is such a perfect vehicle for storytelling because it is hitting you on all these levels of different senses. When I was in college, back at the old University of Michigan, our old chair of the department, this guy named Brent Wagner, who inspired like all these writers. There's so many writers that have come out of Michigan, whether that's Nick Fleimeyer or Pasek and Paul or Jeff Marks. There's like a lot of folks. And he always would say this quote, this Yip Harbor quote, the guy that wrote Wizard of Oz and stuff. It was something about, I will totally do this quote wrong, but it's like, I think it's words make you think, music makes you feel, a song makes you feel a thought. So like this idea that like you can really get to the core of emotion with these actors or with these characters rather, and it can be really affecting in a really wonderful way. I think it goes back to like ancient Greek, right? Like the whole reason that we have group storytelling, communal storytelling around a campfire, like all that stuff. It's because we're learning about ourselves. And I think it's just a beautiful way to tell stories.
Yeah. It's interesting as well. Like every time I re-listen, I always pick up something new and interesting that you've woven through the work as well. And I think it's so interesting as well, the way music hits us, not just on a conscious level, but mostly subconsciously. Like lyrics, I think, hit us on the conscious level a lot, but it's the music that sort of goes underneath everything. And like I just noticed for the first time on Another Terrible Day at the end when Mr. D says, "Oh gods," it's the same melody as later in the campfire song. And it's just like those little details where I was like, oh man, yeah, because Dionysus is also a child of a god in many ways, even though that doesn't play as much into the story, like how it unifies all of these characters. And you mentioned world building as well, which is one of the things I'm always most curious about, because I think for a lot of people who maybe aren't as familiar with the writing process of theater, they might think of world building in theater as primarily like a stagecraft situation or like a set design type situation, maybe some writing in there, but I would love to ask how you approach the musical world building of the show, just because I know that actually, like you said, really makes people feel things, and how that develops this undercurrent throughout of the show of creating something that feels cohesive. Because again, like I said, there's all these little moments where I notice even like the underscoring as well, how the mythological world has a certain sound, the spooky mythological world even. And
I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah. All this work that I put into these things, it's you planting seeds, you know. Well, originally when the show was done, you know, as most of maybe your listeners know, this was originally designed as just like this 1 hour show that had to be in a van before it was like, you know, unpacked and we made the full bigger thing. And so we didn't have like the ability to really do much of in terms of set or costume. We did some costume stuff, but or lighting for that matter. Some of these things were like, you just had to rely on the sound, the things that we had control over, the actors and the sound of the thing, and how do we create scale, a sense of imagination, a sense of adventure. How do you create that with a small band or tracks? And I did produce the first, you know, what went on tour with tracks, and then, you know, was lucky enough to work with an amazing co-orchestrator when we ripped the show apart and build it up to be, you know, bigger, and playing with orchestrations was really fun. It always goes back to like character ultimately, but there are themes where like I'll be inspired by something that is that feels of that world. Like for example, my parents are huge classical music buffs, so like I grew up listening to a lot of classical music, and one piece that I really loved was Gustav Holst's The Planets, which is this like magical epic. I don't know if you've ever listened to it. It's this incredible piece of music, and each planet has like its own character, and like Mars, the bringer of war, was deeply exciting and inspiring. It's like in 5/4, and it's like da, 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 da. You've heard it in a million movie soundtracks. And like Jupiter, there is like this sense of space, of like of epicness, of time, and I was like, how could I create something like that texturally with an electric guitar? And so that was kind of like one of the ends to the piece. And then a lot of it was like, you know, what serves the character. And I can talk about more specifically that in a sec. But yeah, you just kind of have to, how do I feel about things like the monster themes, for example? What's something that hits me as kind of spooky and scary? And then how can I thread that through to unify the thing? And so that's kind of how that works. I get inspired by a lot of different things. I write orchestrally. Or like I think about because I played in a lot of rock bands and a lot of different kinds of bands. I think about, and I like to music direct on the side, I wear a lot of hats. And one of those things I'm thinking about is like, well, what kind of instrumentation means something here, or how could that be affected even in my composition?
The composer I work with a lot, he's very similar, I think, where we joke he orchestrates on the piano part. So the piano parts look very different when he's playing it versus somebody else. But I know he had he always has, in his vision, there's always like one or two very funny instruments that he's always like, we need this. So I was wondering if you had any.
Are you referring to the melodica? Are you referring to the melodica in my show? Well, I play with a lot of people, a lot of friends, and one of my dearest friends is this wonderful composer named Joe Iconis. And for many years, he wrote the show Be More Chill, and that's actually how I met Joe Trace, our book writer for both of those musicals. And I always played melodica for Joe gigs because I didn't want to schlep around an accordion, and I'm not able to play harmonica very well. And it's this wonderful instrument. You blow into it. It's keyboard you blow into. Ben Folds used it and I liked it. I was, brought up on 90s pop, and early 2000s stuff. So I really love that instrument. It's great for helping flesh out vocals and like vocal pad, and it cuts it in a really great way. So it's a kind of great mix between an accordion and a harmonica. And I love the sound of it. It's a little quirky. You'll recognize it for the theme song to The Office. And I was just like, part of what's fun about this show is, is these characters taking agency to tell the show in their own way, and they're quirky and they're weird. So why not a quirky, fun, weird instrument? So why not? You'll hear it a lot in songs like Another Terrible Day, but but like each instrument or like it kind of has a character assigned to it. So like Annabeth is really analytical, and her brain I wanted to kind of represent like a computer, so that's why I use the Rhodes keyboards. It has those beautiful bells on it. That's kind of like a Wurlitzer, but it's Rhodes kind of at times hit a little harder, so it sounds a little like a computer. So a lot of her stuff was written on a Rhodes keyboard. And then Percy, because he's didactic and impulsive, I wrote on the electric guitar. It's the angstiest, it's more fun, and it's honest. I'm not the world's greatest electric guitar player, so it also kept me more honest with the kinds of chords that I found or stumbled onto fun things. Because Percy is a sweet, honest guy. And then Grover, I wrote mostly on the acoustic guitar, because he's, a hippie sweetheart. And so like those kinds of things. And I just kind of would play around with that. And then I could get really nerdy if you want on a song.
Oh, please.
Yes.
Like Good Kid, for example. This is how I thought about kind of orchestrating or like how the song process went. I knew that Percy was getting kicked out of camp again, and when we were ripping the show apart, I was like, this is the spot for a song. And Joe was off working on a television show. He's like, you go ahead and write that song, which is not normal. Normally I take a scene and I cannibalize it and turn that into a song. Or we talk about it and we outline it really clearly. In this case, I was like, I know exactly what has to happen. This is a moment for Percy to like lash out and reconnect with, like, for the audience to reconnect with him. And we had cut this other song that had this like crunchy sound, and I thought it felt like bees in his head. That's the only way I could describe it. Of like the seething anger you have with it, like that knot in the back of you get when you're mad. And that to me was like this compressed, distorted electric guitar played kind of quietly. And so that was the start of the song. And then I was like, what if he has a full-on temper tantrum? And I think I was listening to a lot of Paramore or My Chemical Romance. And so there was this like this like 3/4 time signature, but it's pushed eighth notes, pushed dotted eighth notes or dotted quarter notes, ba 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 da da, and it felt like stomping. And I was like, oh, that's him throwing a temper tantrum. And then what I did was the fifths in the bass. I had the bass player do like fifths that are really muddy, and it reminded me of like some Soundgarden stuff I love, even though the song is so poppy. It's not like alt rock at all, but it's like I wanted to use something that felt like muddy and angry and dirty there. And so that was a place of like anger. And then when he lashes out, and then when he finally looks at a place of hopefulness, saying like, I'm trying to do this thing, I'm trying to be this good kid, all of a sudden I use a common tone of the key of G, and I do this octave jump because this big giant leap in intervals is really exciting, and it fits with his character of this kid who makes these giant, he's impulsive, he can't sit still, right? He's got ADHD and dyslexia. And so this giant jump happens, and the song shifts from the key of G, I use the C minor, and then lead to the relative or to the minor 6, and I land in the key of E flat at major, and it suddenly this opens up, but he's holding it on that G that connects the two keys, and it was a really thrilling moment. And I was like, what if we now go into 4/4 time signature? And it's like I'm this pleading, this beseeching, this begging, this yearning, this hoping is like in this more grooving, driving thing that is less angry and more like questioning, trying to figure out why he can't get ahead, why everybody's against him. And over that, I had these little glockenspiel lines, this and that reminded me a lot of listening to Bruce Springsteen. And there's something about a lot of New Jersey bands in particular of them. There's just something, whether it's Bon Jovi, Bruce Springsteen, My Chemical Romance, these bands that have a lot of like, they're like about songs that deal with like people going through a tough time that are just like you and me. They're like, we call like in theater, like the every person character, you know? And there is this like working class triumph through adversity stuff in like Born to Run, right? Let's just go on the road and let's forget, and let's just you and me. And there are these glockenspiels. And I was like, oh, what if that was like peppered in? So like, you know, Good Kid is an amalgam of like all those kinds of ideas from bands and songs that I love, filtered through character and that moment. And then my favorite thing, and when you talk about lyrics too, is like I was stuck with the lyric. I didn't know where the song could go because I didn't want it to just be a temper tantrum. And he's like, and I'm hoping that I'm good enough for someone. And I love pop songs because they can use repetition in such a cool way. And so I just was like, I'm good enough for someone. I'm good enough for someone. And suddenly the song stops being a question and it becomes an answer. He doesn't need anyone to tell him he's good enough. He's good enough. And that's what the theme of the whole show is, and to some degree, self-reliance and taking responsibility and taking agency in the world you want to see. And I don't think without that moment, then the scene with Luke would work, because then Luke plants the seed and he's like, okay, I'm going to go to the underworld. He needed to get to that point. So that's how I think about all those things. And like when it comes to motif, you know, there's the da-na-na-na, that's the Poseidon theme, right? And then when Percy's mom sings Strong at the beginning, there's the like, the normal is on it. You have that thing. And at the end of Son of Poseidon, when Percy like becomes kind of his own person, you hear the Poseidon theme and Strong interplay together over Percy's last note. And it's kind of, he's a product of, you know, he's a demigod. He's a product of both the lessons he's learned from both parents, and but he's something new, he's something different. And so that's the thing that motif can really do in a cool way. All right, that was really dorky, so sorry about
that. No, this is great. We love it.
I'm about to listen to Good Kid in a whole new light.
I know. Yeah, I love it as well because it's such, I mean, first of all, I want to say that one of my favorite adaptational not changes, I guess, but like things you brought out in the adaptation was the fact that getting kicked out of camp, like making that connected to his feeling of being also kicked out of all the schools, because it's very different in the book, I feel like, those emotions. And I just thought, like, you know, as a theater writer, I'm thinking like, oh man, what a brilliant way to streamline this and continue this one character thing. Because I feel like in books you have a lot more leeway for much more complex meandering arcs than you do in theater.
Yeah, you don't have that as much real estate. And one thing that, you know, the unsung hero to a good musical is a good book writer. And Joe Trace is a genius at being able to thread those moments. There are similar lines said by characters at different moments that have a different take on them, but follow through ideas or link characters together that are so brilliant. And so I don't know if that was a Joe thing or it was a me thing, but we were when you work on something for as long as we did, you know, it just our brains kind of mesh together, and you look for those moments of continuity where you can compress an idea into the spirit of the source material. It may not be exact, but it feels to me like it came from the book. Like one of my favorite lines in the musical is when Percy says, you know, the Tartarus, and he says, you mean like the fish sauce? And I laugh. So it still like gets a killer laugh every time. And it seems like something that Percy would say 100%. Oh, yeah. You know, it was never in the book. I was like, yeah, that's something Percy would 100% say.
Speaking of motifs, I noticed something for the very first time re-listening to the show. The chords used on the guitar in Strong were very similar to the guitar that came in their sign when Luke showed up. And it was like this overwhelming sense of comfort that came in when Luke came in. And the way you guys use Luke in the show is one of my favorite parts of this entire show. I think it's so brilliant. He particularly feels very theatrical. Like he fits in perfectly with the way that you're using the theatrical medium.
That's one thing that even though we were only able to adapt one book, we wanted Luke to feel like a fully fleshed out character. And I'm looking at other books in the series and where he goes and what he does, like to really understand where he's coming from. This is a perfect foil for Percy. Things could easily have gone the same way for Percy, and we want to feel for him, you know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it also has to do with the warmth of an acoustic guitar in an open voicing. It's the same thing in like Drive. Whenever you have like, or not Drive, Try, the song that was cut. It's like there's this. I love open E voicings where you get the ringing, especially on like a 12 string. And the guitar that we used for the show, Kevin Wonderlick's like beautiful. It's a Taylor that just has this warm, rich sound, and it's like a warm blanket. And when we find out that Sally dies, and no one has, like, unless you do the show, you don't get to hear a lot of the other underscoring of that. Like in Another Terrible Day, The Day I Got Expelled, there's all kinds of underscoring of Good Kid throughout that. But, you know, it's like, I wrote all that stuff post the cast album, which the cast album is the off-Broadway show. It's not the Broadway show. There's a lot of changes we made. One day, maybe we'll get another cast recording, but...
London!
Who knows? But I'm working on something. But that the moment that Sally dies, there's this it was the last piece of music I wrote for the show, actually, after we'd opened. I was like, there needs to be a moment where Brunner is saying, I'm so sorry, you know, and Percy says it's my fault, you know, and I was like, I want to hear Normal as a Myth on just that solo beautiful acoustic guitar, just that melody line, just that stings out. I love the show Evita. I did the show a million years ago, and there's a similar like line where like Ava is sick or something, and there's this like this beautiful acoustic. I was like, oh, I want to have a moment like that. I want to have a moment where like the audience gets to feel what Percy's feeling, and an acoustic guitar can really do that. It's so warm. It is like a warm hug.
Speaking of acoustic guitar, I would love to narrow us down to some more discussions of some specific songs. Tree on the Hill. My absolute favorite song in this show. It's so gorgeous and really had me looking at Grover and his relationship with Thalia and Thalia's tree in like a totally new light. And when we interviewed Joe, he mentioned that you had been the one campaigning for Grover to have that song, or the song that became Tree on the Hill. So I'm curious what drove all of that for you.
Well, honestly, there were 3 songs that I campaigned for, and that was in breaking the show into a larger format when we moved from 1 hour to 2 hour, was that it wasn't just about adding more plot. It was really about giving some gravitas to like some weight to these emotions that these main characters were feeling. And so that's kind of where that impetus came from. Tree on the Hill was like a kind of an action song. It was kind of like a murder ballad is kind of how I saw it. When it functioned in the 1 hour, and it was kind of zany and funny. And I was like, what if we kind of took this apart and I rewrote it as this song for Grover? And I think that's the thing that's surprising with the song, is that, you know, so much of the story deals with perception, and we think Grover is this goofy, sweet guy, but he has a lot of real pain and regret, and you get to like rip that happy-go-lucky nature off for a second beneath the veneer. You see like he has so much that he's dealing with, that baggage of letting Thalia die, or you know, not, he didn't let her die, but it's like he wasn't there to protect her. He couldn't protect her, and so that's a real emotion, and I wanted to like honor that. And so the bridge of that song, the feeling of that song, all kind of needed to have more weight to it. It definitely was leaning into a lot of like Smashing Pumpkins for the bridge. There's a lot of like Whiskey Town, a lot of like stuff that I love. And you know, it originally started on acoustic, and we moved it to the electric on this like pretty open kind of twangy vibe. And it really did add the sense of like, we're going on an old school story back in time. You know, there's something about that. Like I was in a country band a million years ago, and there's something about that, you know, an alt rock kind of electric guitar sound that'll take you back. And so, yeah, that's where that came from. And you know, Grand Plan was cut many times for the show, and I had to fight to get it back in. We just couldn't find a place to have it go. And then there was Good Kid, and yeah, those it it really needs to anchor those characters. You need those benchmarks to just like, you know, ground the piece. Otherwise, yeah, it's so much plot, especially in a you know, the first book in many series. You know, it's like you have to compress, and you have, you know, but at the same time, it's like we have to follow these characters, and that's really what dictates what can be kept and what can be cut at the end of the day. You know, I got asked a couple weeks ago about like, why did, you know, the TV series, you know, they go on their adventure really soon after like the second episode, and your act break is right before their adventure starts. It's like half camp at that. And I'm like, yeah, we had to establish a lot, and why it's so important that sense of community at camp is taken away, and how to find that again and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's so true. You need those moments also of connection, but like also catharsis. That's what I was thinking about when you were talking about Good Kid, especially, is how cathartic that song is. It's really just this outpouring of emotion that you just get to experience with Percy.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because, you know, and in writing school, they always tell you, you know, don't write emotion. A song has to do one of two things: further plot or reveal character. And I'm like, it is revealing character in a way, and it is helping the plot. It is. I think it isn't just a temper tantrum just for its own sake. But yeah, it was a fine line to walk. But it does feel good when you're mad. Like, listening to angsty songs is like the best thing, or singing it makes you feel better.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with that wisdom. Maybe I'm just a person that loves to shove as much as possible into everything she writes. But I mean, theater is such an exercise of economy in writing. You really can't write a song that only does one thing. And I find those are the songs that I tend to skip when I'm re-listening to them, because I'm like, yeah, we get it, you know, after a single verse and chorus. Versus like, you know, I feel like Tree on the Hill, like, as you sort of mentioned, you're kind of making it sounding like, oh yeah, this thing happened in the past. It adds to the world building too, of like, this is a world that's bigger than Percy, where things happened before him and then things will happen after.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it as well most recently too, because you mentioned that one of the first musicals you'd ever adapted was the Oresteia, which
oh God.
It's interesting to me because when we were doing our coverage on The Last Olympian, I went a little off the rails with my parallels, but with the Trojan War and the Iliad and that story. But I found myself thinking a lot about Iphigenia, who is the daughter Agamemnon sacrifices, and her parallels with Thalia, who also is a daughter sacrificed by a father, that in a way kicks off a war. Because to me, that's what starts Luke's journey.
Oh, 100%. Like his resentment for that and getting hurt by his parents. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, so much about these Greek myths are about dysfunctional families. And I love that Rick leans into the dysfunction. A lot of other types of adaptations of Greek myths sanitize them, or they come from a very like Western or patriarchal place, like Medusa's backstory, for example, which I think the television show did a nice job of kind of playing with. And I wrote a whole other musical called Monster Songs, which deals specifically with Medusa, and kind of giving her agency again. But like, I think what's interesting about trust me, my first musical was terrible. It was in college. It was called Trespasses. It was like a gritty cop drama version of the Oresteia, set in like, you know, New York. Everybody was like dirty, and yeah, it was just pimps, and it was a lot of murder, and but at the end of the day, it was about the same thing, about cycles, about family and cycles. And it's like, you know, you're right, Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter, and then Clytemnestra kills him, and then Orestes come home and kills her. It's just like, at some point it has to stop. At some point, like, we have to take responsibility, and we can't keep fighting our parents' battles. And I think like, you know, we can take responsibility and make our own choices, even if that means going against the will of the gods, right? Even if, you know what I mean? Because Orestes was told to avenge his death. And at some point it's like, no, we have to stop. And that's, I think like, I'm no Greek scholar, but I think like that is a big takeaway of the Oresteia, is like, you know, the Athena intervenes when they have the whole Apollo, this is real nerdy for y'all, when they go... They basically create the first judicial system, this idea that like civic justice over, you know, personal retribution. And it's a beautiful idea, that like, we need checks and balances, that we just can't be avenging folks for no reason. And that, like, again, there's something else going on there. You have to really think about the battles you're fighting. Who are they for? And I think that parallel is very clear in The Lightning Thief, of like, you don't have to fight your parents' battles. You got to think for yourself, which carries on through to Bring on the Monsters, very much, which was completely rewritten, which I think, Brenda, we talked about a little bit in your podcast with him.
Yeah, I mean, I every piece of art is political, and I think that Oresteia's main takeaway is it's like, and it's interesting as well, because the story of like, how do we stop these cycles of revenge, I feel like has been told so many times by so many different authors throughout history. Mm-hmm. So I find it really interesting that in this one, the playwright Aeschylus was sort of solving that, being like, justice is how you do it. You have a court of law, you put someone on trial, and then that trial ends actually with forgiveness, and that's how we move on. We break the cycle in that way.
And 100%, that is the biggest moment that I had to crack in the whole show was Son of Poseidon, because it was really hard to like find. There's almost like two climaxes. There's like this kind of physical fight of a climax with Ares, and then there's the emotional climax with Luke, where Percy uses everything he's learned. But part of what I was really having a hard time struggling with Son of Poseidon is like, Percy resents his dad. He's never been there for him. But at the end of the day, like, his dad gives him this gift that's able to help him, and he has to forgive his dad. That is a hard thing for a kid to do. It's the thing that Luke can't do. And Percy says that line that is maybe my favorite line in the show, which is, maybe my dad was a screw up too. And it's like, our parents are just doing the best they can. And at some point we have to take responsibility for ourselves. And it's that change in Percy that allows him to move forward and cannot hold all of that anger as much. And he's also learned from Grover, and he's learned from Annabeth at this point. So he's taking all those lessons in conjunction and applying them. But yeah, I think there is that thread throughout a lot of these stories.
Well, now that you've brought our favorite up, it's Luke.
Fair enough.
I'm curious also, in light of everything you're talking about musically with Good Kid, because we can't not talk about I would argue, the most iconic moment in this entire musical, which is the Good Kid reprise.
Look, I didn't know it was going to work. And in fact, and then one day in rehearsal, it was like, it clicked in my brain so clearly, and we had already frozen the show, and was like, no, I got it, because it was like a monologue. It was a monologue over that music. But I was like, no, this is sung. This needs to be sung. It's almost rhyming as it is. I know a way to fix it. And then I finally was able in the next workshop to put it in, and everybody went, what? It was one of the most thrilling. I remembered so clearly writing it. And honestly, it's that thing where like I would watch other people watch it. Off-Broadway in particular. I had some friends, so a fancy songwriter friend that came to see the show, and he was in the edge of the seat, and it was just like, I was like, he's into it. Oh yeah, they're into it. It's working. Everybody, like, you could hear a pin drop. Like, it's really exciting when that works. And that's what we're talking about, motifs, right? You use Percy's Good Kid theme against him, and and it's. He literally can. Luke throws it in his face. I've been here since I was a kid. Look at what they do. Look at what they do to you. It's not worth this, right? How much do they take from you? It's almost like grandiose, like opera, like almost like the mafia. It's just like, look at what it takes from you. They really, they make you do these things, and you really feel for Luke. You see, he's got a point, So it's a really fun moment to be able to use a theme like that. I love motifs like that. Thinking about Son of Poseidon too, because there's the Put You in Your Place reprise, right? Teresa sings it, then her dad sings it. It unifies the two of them.
It's interesting. I'm just thinking about it now too, just from the writing perspective, because I feel like what's kind of really cool about the Good Kid reprise also is it's like I feel like it's almost like for those audience members that maybe are subconsciously not fully satisfied with like, well, Percy, you still don't really know your dad, by the end of Son of Poseidon. Like, we see Percy's kind of come to terms with it, but maybe I feel like that Good Kid reprise, it almost like brings that remaining like doubt to the fore, and it acknowledges it like, hey, you might still have gone through this whole journey and you still might not be okay with like what your parents have done, you know, ignoring you. And I feel like it allows the story to bring it up and confront it again in a way that I think makes that ending even more satisfying.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm very proud of it.
I'm also, as a writer, I'm always curious as well about the role of reprise in musical theater. So I was curious if you have like an overall philosophy on it, or just any thoughts about the role in musical theater. Because I think what's interesting about this musical is you really like the you know, the traditional quote unquote reprise is, you know, a full song, but we don't really see that in this musical.
You get it. I mean, like, there's so much story to tell. It's hard to use them. I had lots of them in previous drafts. There was an entirely other strong reprise that Sally sings when she reunites with Percy. There was a strong reprise that Poseidon sings to Percy, and there was a Killer Quest reprise in that I fought so hard to keep in the underworld when they're accusing Annabeth, and this idea of like when they're deciding who is going to stay behind in the underworld, each one of them decides to stay for the other one, and they use the Killer Quest motif. I really love that. So like, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's a bit of a hat on a hat. Like, you have to use them sparingly. I think like no one wants to hear the same song a million times. But if you use it in a way that is either building on a character's experience like you're talking about, or subverting that experience, then I think it's warranted in a really cool way. So that's kind of how my philosophy for it. If it feels earned and it's going to reveal something cool, it's a really great shorthand for the audience. You're like, oh, that thing. And it's also great to like reference a character when there's so many characters, in terms of like, oh, this person's theme. Oh, this is the thing. I should be nervous now because I'm hearing the monster motif when Medusa's around, or I should, you know what I mean? Like, it's a good clue. And like, it's just like in a horror movie, you know, cinematic underscoring can really, really help you tell the audience what's about to happen a little bit, or play against the lyric.
Yeah, I'm curious. So I hear in Bring On the Monsters, you know, when more and more voices come in, I hear My Grand Plan, but I also hear, I think it's Drive from Grover, I want to say.
Yeah.
So I was curious why Drive for Grover.
Well, yeah, the original lyrics to Bring On the Monsters are totally different. They're very passive. They're very much like thinking about like when I went to camp. I went to camp in upstate Michigan, and like that last day of camp of like, well, who am I going to see the next year? Like how I'll be changed. It was very much like reflective. It was like, what will you take? What will you remember when you leave this place? And it was that kind of thought. And then the election happened, and the Orange Cheeto got elected, and I really was like, no, this song needs to change. It needs to be a call to action. It reminds me of like my favorite movie. One of them is Empire Strikes Back. And the reason for it is because it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. It's like the friends are scattered. They're going to have to hold fast to each other and what they believe in and fight the monsters. And I was like, that seems like a better call to arms. So when all of these voices are swirling around Percy at the very end, including Drive, it was like, what are the lessons that he's taken? What are the things that he's going to remember to be able to go into battle? Because this moment is, the battle right now is over, but like the bigger one to come is far from over. And the real world is where those monsters are. How are we going to face them? So, you know, hearing Strong, hearing Normalism Myth, hearing, you know, Annabeth's, you know, ideas of like, what does it mean to be remembered? You know, like Grover's idea of like, you just keep going. That's what Drive is about, right? You just push through, right? You have to keep up, because what's the alternative, right? And then peppered in with that is you hear Luke and some of the other campers, reprising the very, very beginning angsty thing, which is like the prologue to the very, very beginning of the show, which is, we'll make them listen to us. We'll make them listen, which is different. It's changed lyrically. The first time is, but it's time you heard our story. And it's like, you never listen to us is how the show starts. And the show ends with, we'll make them listen. And so that's an interesting kind of fun bookend to the piece. And so all of those things are swirling around Percy, these ideas of compassion, of perseverance, all of those things. And that's what's helpful. Yeah, Drive is a really fun song. it was totally something else. It was a song called In the Same Boat that compressed way too much time. It was really silly and fun, and everybody wanted me to keep it, and I kept saying no, absolutely, like, because it compressed this whole timeline from like all the way from Medusa all the way to the underworld, and I was like, no, we can't keep it. It's silly and it's fun. And it gave us like the one bridge where we get to see kind of Annabeth's feelings for Percy. But honestly, it was like it needed to go. And when it went, it was able to write like a road trip song. And I went back to my like, days of playing in a country band. And I was like, I wanted something that's kind of like a road trip, getting on a road trip song. And so that's where Drive came out of. And it's got that acoustic guitar, that open string E, where I'm just kind of moving around, and that's really fun. And yeah.
Speaking of cut songs, so In the Same Boat, I know was written for sort of an earlier version, right? That was shorter. But first I was just curious generally where on the timeline these songs were written and cut. Because like Try, for example, when I listen to it, I'm like, this sounds like an Act 1 ender to me. Like this sounds like, a big moment where they're about to start their journey. But of course, I also knew that Killer Quest was one of the songs you originally wrote on spec for the musical, right?
Yeah.
So I was curious how that all pieced together.
I mean, like, over the 10 years of writing the show, I mean, like, I cut so much song. I think there was something like 30 musical moments. There was like the Rainbow Phone song. There was like the opening. I think I wrote 4 openings to Act 2, especially the like. There's a song called "Pick a Side." There was like which is probably the most musically complicated and interesting thing, and isn't in the show at all.
It's a banger, though.
Oh, it's fun. That's why I wanted to like preserve it for some capacity. And I wrote like a million intros to the opening to try to figure out how to crack the intro to the song, because it used to just start with "The Day I Got Expelled," and I needed something else. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that gets cut and over the years, and I'm not precious, and neither is Joe Trace. Like, you have to, the expression is "kill your darlings." It's just like the song will exist whether or not you use it. And I repurposed a lot of things. There was like a Hades song, and also that's where the beginning of Good Kid happened. The like 6 schools in 6 years, that happened in the underworld, and it also happened in the Echidna sequence. We had a whole entire Echidna sequence. We had a Hoover Dam sequence. We had so many. Oh my God, we had so many songs and so many locations and things. And like, I'm so mad we couldn't have kept Gabe coming back and doing the news reporter. That was really funny. There was like, that kept going throughout the show. I think we had the squirrel come back at some point. Like
yes.
So many. It's just like at the end of the day, we also had to like deal with the thing that had to be was the theater itself closed our doors, and they'd have to pay everybody overtime if it went over an hour. Or over 2 hours, exactly, with an intermission. So that's why the show is so tight at 2 hours, like exactly, as I had to cram in stuff and cut the rest out. Try was never in the show. It never even made it to a workshop. It was a song where I was writing these, during the time period when I was writing these like emotional, kind of more mature songs for the character's inner life, like Grand Plan, like Good Kid, like Tree on the Hill. I wanted a moment like that for the trio that wasn't Killer Quest. And so, yeah, that's kind of where that came from. But it was never in the show. And then when we went to Broadway, it was because it was a limited run. I knew that, like, we're never going to get a cast recording out of this. We already have the cast recording. They're not going to make another one. The show isn't that different. But I was like, I would love to celebrate these actors that have been with the show for so long that weren't off Broadway, except for Kristen Stokes, but like everybody else was different. So I was like, what's a way I can do that? So I helped co-produce the cut songs of the ones that I like thought worked. And then I've released 2 on my own since then as well. A song called Across This River, which was another Underworld song, the first Underworld song, which was just kind of scary, but not as fun. And then another song called Take the Weight. That was a little too emo and didn't quite fit, but it was nice for Annabeth. And actually used a reprise, a motif from In the Same Boat. So you see these songs, they all kind of come back in one form or fashion. Try was one that I know for a concert I used, and I loved it. And I was just like, there's not quite real estate for it. Maybe I can find another place later, but like, it just didn't fit for that version.
Well, I'm glad you were able to release them, though, because every time we post about the musical, all of the comments we get are, but have you listened to this on, like, one of the cut songs? Like, Try and Pick a Side, especially, I feel like, are huge. Like, people love those songs so much.
Yeah, I love them, too. And maybe, you know, there's more life for one of those songs sometime soon.
I was about to ask, while we're talking about, you know, rewriting, making changes, all of that, to talk about how the show currently stands. You've got about a month until this show has its first performances in London.
It's really exciting to see an entirely new vision of the show, especially since we're with the same director who I adore. I adore him, Stephen Brackett, for as long as we were. But now it's like really fun to kind of step back and let an entirely new team tackle it. And in a really cool theater. It's the other Palace is like 250, 300 seats, I think, and it's back to being kind of like where we started at the Lortel, and I think it's a great size theater for this show. There'll be some immersive stuff. We have an illusionist. I think it's somebody who worked on the Harry Potter musical. I can't remember, but the Brits love magic, so we've got like the pen and the sword is gonna blow your mind. That's what my director said. She keeps saying, I haven't seen it yet. I'm dying to see it, but it like happens right in front of you, like the pen into the sword. There's a lot of magical moments that are really exciting, and that's the thing about theater. We were talking about like why is it adapted? Theater's like, because isn't it cool to see like that magic right in front of you, like to have those experiences. There'll be some kind of immersive stuff, and there'll be some surprises. Joe and I were like, there's an opportunity here to maybe put something back in that we missed, and to maybe address like a character that we don't hear from in a certain song that we wanted the verse in around a campfire. So like there's stuff like that, and it's fundamentally the same show, but with just a little bit of tweaking. We'll see. I mean, they just learned all the music, and we'll see what else I hear. We also have more actors. So we're able to do more tricks and things, and that's fun.
Yeah.
I've never had more actors. We've always had like very small casts. So it's fun to hear like actors that won't be out of breath while they're sword fighting and running around and all the things. Yeah, Lizzie G, she's awesome. She is an amazing choreographer as well. So I think she's going to do some killer stuff with DOA.
That'll be really fun. We did get to see a middle school version of it where they did have like the full cast out for DOA and all these different costumes. That was really fun.
My God. Yeah, there's something wild about seeing these like high school productions where there's like 400 people on stage. I'm like, we did this with 6 people originally. It's crazy. I don't know. I kind of think there's a happy medium. Like this show is 12, I think is in London. It'll be great. But there is something really fun about watching poor Sarah Beth Pfeiffer play. I think it was like 32 characters or 32 costume changes in the original. Those 7 actors would come out on Broadway and the audience would be like, where are the rest of the cast? Because they couldn't believe that just those 7 people had done all of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the fun. I love when you get to play like a billion parts.
And it did result in one of the funniest moments that I saw on the show, which was I think it was Jonathan Revive at the time playing both Poseidon and Chiron, and he runs off stage and then like 2 seconds later has to be back on stage and his shirt was still unbuttoned and he's buttoning it as he comes on and goes, I galloped here as fast as I could.
we kept that. I think we kept that. It was so funny. There was a lot of lines like that. The original Percy, Eric Myers, was so fun. We were like walking into Medusa's lair, and he was like, she seems nice, and we were just dying laughing. And yeah, credit Eric Myers for that line. But like the actors we've had play these parts are like just that's the thing about the show, about the source material, and about having a really fun director that fosters a sense of play in the room. I mean, George Salazar flipping that chair, kicking it, screaming at everyone as Mr. D. Like, it really was so fun to make this show. I mean, I have so many fond memories. Like, the Campfire song was written when Joe came over to my apartment, and we were writing late at night because we got the brief from our artistic director, Barbara Pasternak, who's the one that really fought for the show to happen in the first place. And And we were writing, and we're like, what if this character sings this thing? And we're like, and my poor wife, she was just like, you guys, just write it in the morning. And so Joe's sleeping on the couch, I'm in bed, and I'm texting him lyrics at like 2 a.m. And my wife is like, "Jeez, just go in the other room and write it with it." And we're like, no, what if Miss like Britter gets in and like, or Kyron has a verse about Corona. So we're like, yeah, there's like that spirit of fun that we made the show with is, I think, kind of carries on with every company that does it, or at least I hope that they do, because it was a joy to make the thing.
And I think it shows in the end product, but just like in every stage of it, like you can just tell everyone's having the best time. And I think it unlocks a new level of like the comic ability, because if you're just having a great time on stage, you're just gonna be that much funnier, and you're gonna really just lean in new fun ways.
Yeah, and I think like the expectation was like, we just want to make something fun that we love. It was never like, we're going to make a Broadway show. It just happened because the fans loved it and producers loved it, and it just snowballed. But we just wanted to set out to make something fun that we loved. And I think that's like a lot of good art. Like it comes from a good, if you have your intentions in the right place, you never know what'll happen to it.
Yeah.
Other people will take off. It's all you can do. You can't know how other people will take your stuff. You just gotta write what you love.
And I think it shows in the fact that, it's being brought back now, and I hope more and more people will get the opportunity to fall in love with it and continue the snowball on.
Thank you.
Okay, we're coming up on time, so one last question for you. We ask a variation of this at the end of every episode.
Hit me.
So at the end of every summer, the last day of summer, if you will, the campers at Camp Half-Blood receive a bead with a painting on it that symbolizes the most impactful or meaningful moments from the last 3 months together. So if you had to design a bead for the Lightning Thief musical, either one that would close the musical out, actually, or one based on your own personal experiences with it, what would the bead be to represent this show?
Why do I feel like like Annabeth had like a horse of a prom dress? Is that a thing that she had as one of her beads?
A centaur in a prom dress.
I have this tattoo of the trident that I love to remind me to like that this good thing happened, and it anchors me. Well, and that makes me think about like an anchor, which keeps with the kind of nautical theme. Not that something that weighs you down. It's the opposite of that. I think like anchors, it's a reminder to stay grounded and what's important to help you through rough seas.
Yeah.
Remembering kind of what matters most. What matters most. But yeah, that sense of perseverance and staying, grounded. So maybe an anchor, I don't know, like a spiral, something like that. Something nautical.
The spiral seashell, maybe?
Yeah, that would be a good one too. Love a spiral seashell. Well, that's also like in nature, and it's the sense of perseverance as well, and like, going on perpetually.
Thank you so much again for being here with us and for creating this incredible show.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Would you like to plug anything exciting that you're up to right now?
Yeah, I mean, like, for those of you who don't know, that I write a lot of other kinds of music and musicals, and I'm about to release a brand new concept album for a piece I'm writing with Anna K. Jacobs, who wrote Teeth, based on the horror movie that's running right now off Broadway. She's brilliant.
Great musical.
Yeah, she's fantastic, and I love her. So she wrote the book, and I wrote the music and lyrics, and that is called The Real Gemma Jordan. It's going to come out pretty soon, probably in the next month. And if you want to listen on Spotify, there's a couple songs released for that, and the cult musical I wrote with Sarah Beth Pfeiffer about an oceanic cult. It's absolutely wild and really fun, and there's a couple songs from that online on YouTube as well, or Spotify, all the streaming thingies. It's called Experience Marianas. So that's a couple of the things I'm working on, and stay tuned, more Monster Songs. Those of you who know about Monster Songs, the virtual reality video game is nearing completion. So it's a really cool way to experience a musical with this beautiful artwork. I love when a musical can do new things and play with media. another way of storytelling. So yeah, check them out.
You're so cool.
Tell my wife.
And that's Sarah Beth Pfeiffer, who is at least in the off-Broadway version, Clarice /
She was Clarice for she was on Broadway. Yeah, one of my best friends. I just adore her, and we wrote this very weird, very messed up, really fun musical together. Sea monsters and lots of stuff I probably can't say on air, but it's wild. It's really fun. So yeah.
Thank you so much to everybody who has supported us, either by leaving us a rating or a review. We really love to hear your responses to every episode as well. We're still doing our big Reordenverse wrap-up. Eventually, it's coming. So if you have any questions about anything in the Greek and Roman mythology series, for anything, the TV show, movies, musical, books, feel free to send us that. You can either comment on our episodes on Spotify or find us on social media. We are at PJO Pod on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. And also, if you want to send us your own thoughts and analysis, you can email us at monsterdonutpodcast@gmail.com. On all of our social media as well, you'll find links to our link tree where you'll find things such as merch, our coffee, and Patreon if you feel like supporting us monetarily, and we really appreciate you if you do. It really helps us out. On Patreon as well, you're going to be able to find some bonus content from us, in addition to getting a heads up whenever we do interviews like this if you want to submit your own questions.
Speaking of Patreon, thank you to all of our patrons. Latino Kaya, Patty VCK, Bethany from Public Works, Sydney Fox, Joke, Reina Avila Ramirez Arellano, Bronte Lebo, Ethan Not Nakamura, Kels, Mason Bowman, Casey Cassidy, Busy Cat, Natalia, Melissa Rounds, Bridud, Bones of a Carrot, Alana, Elena, Melanie Valdez, Pamela Ion, The Kid on Her Own, Grace Hunker, Kaylee, Manna Munchin, Amy Shu, Calamity, Eddie Burns, Sarah Brown, Colby Redfern, Annie's Not Cool, and Theseus.
Thank you all so much for supporting us, and thank you all for listening. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Discover Hydro, the best-kept secret in fitness. Hydro is the state-of-the-art home rower that engages 86% of your muscles, delivering the ultimate full-body workout in just 20 minutes. From advanced to beginner, Hydro has over 5,000 classes, shot worldwide, and taught by Olympians and world-class athletes. For a 30-day risk-free trial, go to Hydro.com and use code ROW to save $475 on a Hydro Pro rower. That's HYDROW.com, code ROW.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Welcome back to Two Judgy Girls. I'm Mary from the Bay.
And I'm Courtney from LA. TJG is the podcast where we spill all the tea on your favorite reality TV shows, celebrity gossip, and everything in between. We're here to bring you our unfiltered opinions, hilarious commentary, and plenty of laughs along the way.
We're two SDSU Delta Gamma sisters with a microphone and a whole lot of opinions. Each week, we dive headfirst into the wild world of reality television, from Bravo to all the trash TV you could want. We break down the drama, dissect the latest scandals, and share our thoughts on everything from the jaw-dropping moments to the embarrassing antics.
But that's not all. We're not here to just gossip. We're here to connect with you, the jurors, and share our love of all things pop culture. Whether we're dishing on the latest celebrity breakups, discussing our favorite guilty pleasure movies, or sharing embarrassing stories from our own lives, we promise to keep it real, keep it fun, and keep you coming back for more.
Come judge with us.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.